Pretty much every question we get asked by clients during a consultation essentially boils down to this: how durable is refinishing? The questions come in many forms. How long will it last? What's your warranty? Will it chip? Will it stain? What products do you use? Is it a 1 or a 2K product? How many coats of primer do you apply? How many top coats do you apply? What mil thickness do you apply? Or do you bake the finish? These clients are just doing their due diligence, trying to understand the technical ins and outs of the process, which I totally commend, and it's actually why we make these videos explaining these topics. But I also find that customers sometimes go a little too far in trying to understand the technical details and often encounter incorrect or misleading info online or from service providers they're talking to, which they're then basing their assumptions on. I think all these hours of research, poring over websites and forums and emailing different companies, etc., could be answered fairly simply, at least in our case, by just abusing the hell out of our finish. To see what damage can actually happen, how much abuse the finish can take before it cries uncle, and what that wear and tear will actually look like. So that's what we're going to do. In this video, I'm going to test the adhesion, the stain resistance, the impact resistance, the moisture resistance, the scratch resistance, basically anything I can think to throw at it. Now, one important thing to note: in some tests, I'll be intentionally putting so much stress on the coating that it's going to damage the door underneath or the surface that it's sitting on. So you will see things like gouges and scratches intentionally created. So you might think to yourself, hey, look, I can see marks in that coating. The coating is therefore junk. But any coating can take visible damage if it's abused enough, especially if the surface it's stuck to is compromised. Think of it like driving your car into a telephone pole. Of course, the paint is going to look different when the surface it's sitting on is damaged. But the real test is, does the coating keep its adhesion? Does it flex and conform to the surface instead of cracking and lifting? And if it gets aggressively scratched, does the paint get removed by whatever it's being scratched by? Or does it stay on the surface and conform to the depression made by the thing that's scratching it? So enough talk, let's just get into it. Okay, so I've got a sample here of our 2K finish. This is what our clients will receive in the mail. This is just a little piece of MDF that's sprayed with, I think it's Sabric Sage on one side and Dove White on the other. So the first thing that we want to check out is the impact resistance. And this is super important on the edges of your doors, because those are what typically get banged up the most. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just whack this really hard to the point that I'm actually damaging or denting the MDF, because what I'm looking for is to make sure that the coating itself doesn't come off. So we don't want to see the top coat come off, and we don't want to see the primer come off, and we don't want to see MDF underneath. You might see a little bit because you're denting the MDF, the substrate, but we don't want to see it just crack and flake off, because that's when you're going to get a really unsightly issue as opposed to just a dent. You'll get a dent and you'll see your old cabinet color underneath. So I'm going to hit this a few times. It barely even dented it. So there's the damage that I made. And you can see that while there's dents and a little bit of like metal actually that came off the scraper, all that finish is still intact, even though I hit it as hard as I could. So now I'll show you what it looks like as we start to scratch the coating. So as I'm scratching along, the only thing you can see is a little tiny burnishing, and that might even just come off when you clean it. The burnishing is because it's a matte finish, which means it's rough on a microscopic level. So as I'm dragging this across, I'm sort of taking off that rough surface and smoothing it out, which is why it's a little bit shinier. Now I'm going to show you when I press hard what happens. So you can see on the edge of the scraper there is no paint that actually came off onto the sharp metal edge. And the only thing that's left from me pressing as hard as I can is that burnishing, which, is to be expected. But actually, that is it. No damage to the finish at all. And actually these are the impact marks. I just cleaned this. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. And this is up close as well in the light, but when you look at it under normal lighting circumstances, you almost can't see anything. Okay, now for the true test, the stain resistance. This is where having a 2K coating comes in really handy. And I'm gonna put some really nasty grease, animal fat mixed with turmeric, which is something that stains pretty much everything. And then we're gonna clean it off and see how it looks. Now I could use a bunch of other materials like mustard and ketchup that they use when they do the testing in the factory of these coatings, but for time, we're just gonna do turmeric because that is the one thing that stains absolutely everything. And if you're, familiar with Indian cuisine, Middle Eastern cuisine, they use a lot of turmeric. So I'm just going to let it sit for a minute and then we'll see how it cleans. Voila, there's absolutely no residual staining whatsoever. It's just drying a little bit, but yeah, absolutely zero staining, which even quartz countertops I've seen get stained by turmeric. So this is going to be fantastic, especially if you do a bright white color in resisting any type of staining from coffee, mustard, ketchup, red wine, all of those things. Another thing is standing up to, regular cleaning. Now, we always tell people not to use abrasive sponges. We tell people just to use a microfiber towel and some dish soap or a very gentle cleaner, because all you're ever taking off is grease and cooking residue, fingerprints, etc., which are oils. And soap's going to dissolve those oils. So just a gentle soap is fine. But I'm going to use an abrasive sponge because these things are murder on pretty much everything. So I'll just go at it on one half for a while. I'm pressing pretty hard. And then we'll see how the finish stood up. No visible scratches. At least that I can see. Yeah, nothing. I'm going to test the edge here because the edge is where on older kitchens you see almost all of the damage. These edges get bumped, they get handled the most, especially on drawers. You pull something out and bang the edge. So we're going to show the contact. Now the important thing, obviously some damage is going to happen. I'm going to hit it really hard. The important thing is how it gets damaged. What we want to see is that the paint stays adhered to the primer and to the substrate, meaning the door underneath, that it doesn't just chip and flake off, because that's where you're going to get a more unsightly bit of damage. What we want to see is that the door dents, but the paint stays more or less intact, and it's a white primer under this dark color, so it's going to show absolutely everything. Normally we'd actually tint the primer close, if not identically, to the top coat, so that should you actually get the top coat chipping off, then you'll see like an unsightly white primer underneath that'll really bring that to the eye. I'm going to really whack it. So that was almost as hard as I possibly could. I dented the door, but actually the paint's still intact. You don't really see any white primer. So that's pretty much ideal for what we're looking for when we're testing a product. So I just went at it with a car key, and you can see the metal transfer marks, which is the metal coming off the finish. That's why it's dark gray. But the finish itself, still intact and nothing scratched off. I just went as hard as I could with the sharp edge of the key pressing in. Nothing came off. Just an indent in the actual cabinet surface itself. No paint came off onto my finger. So the coating is fully intact, and that's what we want to see. So I just cleaned this, and as you can see, the metal transfer marks are gone. The only thing you see is a little bit of burnishing in the absolute most perfect light from the key scratching the matte finish. And then of course where I dug in, you can still see the divot only because it actually dented the MDF itself. But most importantly, you don't see the primer coming through. The paint didn't come off, because if that paint chips or cracks or flakes or anything, water is going to get in behind it. And over time, that's going to cause a failure that's going to spread bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is why it's super important to have a robust coating, because it stands up to this and still maintains its cohesive film over the surface, which is what gives you protection. And after going at it that hard with a key, you only see a tiny little bit of scratching in the most harsh direct light, but normal viewing of your cabinets at any other angle, you won't see anything. Another test I'm going to do is to see exactly how hard I have to scratch at it to chip or pry the finish off. So I was only able to do one little bit where I think I can see the MDF underneath, which is right here, because I dug the edge in as hard as I possibly could. And in these instances, I was scratching with the very corner as hard as I could. But what you see is it's dented the actual material itself, but there's no paint on the edge of the blade. It's just creating that indentation, and again, that surface layer is still staying intact. And you know, it's unsightly, but actually in normal viewing, it's really not that noticeable, except again, if you hit it in the perfect light. But normal use of your cabinetry, like when you're seeing it in normal light, it's gonna look a lot better than if we actually, you know, had a white primer or the dark door underneath shining through. Just notice one thing that's worth noting. When I was really digging in with the corner of this as hard as I could to get this to lift, and I was able to, the only instance where I was able to, I had to apply maximum force here. And if you see, it's actually the exact same size as the tip of the knife. So I dug in down to the MDF and then scraped along. And the interesting thing is that the coating stayed completely intact after that point that I dug in. So I wasn't even able to break the coating on either side of that, which is actually quite rare. I'm pretty surprised that it did that. But normally when you get one of these, especially with inferior coatings, as soon as you start to scratch in either direction, it comes off, because you're sort of, it's almost like putting a wedge between two pieces of, let's say, I don't know, two pieces of wood that are sitting on top of each other. Your fingernail is creating a wedge between the primer and the top coat, or the primer and the MDF, which helps it to lift a lot easier. Yeah, I'm really impressed with that. Okay, I've never actually abused a sample this much, but the amazing thing is, even after all that abuse, I still can't get the finish to come off. Like normally when there's when it's compromised, you can scratch at it and get it to lose adhesion because you're kind of picking at the weakest part of it. I cannot get anything to come off. That's incredible. I'm blown away by that. Okay, so the final test is the official adhesion test called a crosshatch test. I personally don't like this test because it doesn't simulate real world conditions, but point is you make these crosshatch cuts down to the substrate. You take a piece of masking tape. I'm using white masking tape because it has the strongest adhesion. And you press it down very firmly around the crosshatch area, and then you rip it off like a Band-Aid and see if any paint comes off with the tape. And as you can see, there's a tiny, tiny little bit. So that's really good. Just around, you can see it's in a straight line. So where I cut, the coating was already slightly compromised as that knife's moving through. But that's really good. Do another one on this side because I kind of cut this one at a bit of an angle, so it chipped away a little bit on the sides. So we'll see if that has worse results, but so far the first one was as good as we could hope for. Same thing on that one, just a couple little chunks. So that's pretty ideal. Again, the reason I don't like this is because it doesn't simulate real world conditions. What you're more than likely going to get is this motion, something scratching along it. You're scraping it with I don't know if it's on the edge of your drawer or something. You're scratching along it with something. And what we don't want is for that damage to get worse and worse and worse over time. So we scratch at it as hard as we possibly can with a nail to see if we can get that coating off. Because if you've ever tested an inferior coating or seen an old poorly painted cabinet, this will just come right off. Like sometimes you can just take a flat scraper and just go like this and the entire coating peels off. That's a really bad scenario, but I can't get that to move at all. And that is perfect. That's exactly what we look for in an ideal scenario. So that's what it looks like with all the abuse we could throw at it. Scratching it, trying to dent it, cleaning it with an abrasive sponge. And that's, the worst you're gonna see if you really abuse your cabinets. Most people don't do that, but we just wanted to give you a really honest appraisal of the finish, and so that you can see exactly how it stands up in real world scenarios, because ultimately that's what you care about, and that's what you're paying for when you hire us, and we use the absolute best coatings on the market. Okay, another test I've always wanted to do is I'm actually gonna leave this door sitting in water for 24 hours to see what happens. So this is a new door that we had kicking around. It's MDF, which is, everyone's concerned with MDF is it's gonna swell. So we're gonna see how well the paint coating resists the water over 24 hours. So this is kind of going to give you an estimate on what it's gonna stand up to in terms of water over time, because one of the most abused areas that has the biggest failure tendency is right under the kitchen sink, because there's always water and things like that dripping down constantly over the course of years. So we'll see what happens. So I'm going to leave that. I'll come back in 24 hours. Okay, so it's now been actually more than 24 hours. I put this in yesterday at about 10 a.m. I think, and it's now 5:30 p.m. and totally intact. No damage whatsoever. Just clean. So that'll give you an idea of how it stands up to water over time, as it is MDF underneath. And it's totally fine. Okay, a couple more tests I want to do here at home, because household cleaners and all that stuff That's important. So I've got here some Dawn dish soap, some Lysol bleach, disinfectant spray, which is going to take the place of Windex because it's got ammonia in it and alcohol. Our sample door that we just soaked for 24 hours in water. We've got the sample we've already beat up. We've got some really sticky alcoholic beverage and some Krispy Kreme donuts. These are actually just for me, so I'm going to put those aside. And we're going to get into it. I figure bleach is going to work best on the green color. So we'll do it there. And this is actually a sample I've already wiped with acetone. So if anything's going to be compromised, it's going to be a sample wiped with acetone. But we'll do the same. I don't know if you can see that, but I made a puddle. So I'm going to do the same on both pieces. Do it in the center panel here. Hopefully get rid of this permanent marker. I'll do the Dawn over here. And then we'll do the bleach right here. So I'm going to let that sit for, I don't know, 10-15 minutes and we'll check it out. Okay, enough time has elapsed, so I'm going to try cleaning this off. So I was actually expecting the bleach to do something here, but in focus, there's nothing but the damage we did before. There's absolutely no sign of anything from any of those products. And on the white door, still a little bit wet, but nothing, no alteration of the sheen. As I was cleaning it, it didn't affect it at all, so that's, I would say, a perfect pass. I'm actually surprised bleach didn't affect anything here. I figured while we're at it, let's simulate years and years of cleaning abuse in one test. So I've got a Scrub Daddy here. I don't know if you know, but these are really abrasive sponges. It's not like a magic eraser quite, but similar concept. You know, it's quite abrasive. So I'm just gonna go with this about 100 swipes and I'll speed up the video so you don't have to wait. We wanna see, you know, how it's gonna stand up, especially after it's already been abused, because I hit this with a hammer and scratched it with a key, etc. So let's see how it goes. So this is actually quite amazing. I hope you can see it in the light, but there are no scratches visible. There we go. I mean, you can see the key scratches and stuff I did before, but I was pressing as hard as I could pretty much. And there's no scratches. I was going in this direction. And I can't see anything. And keep in mind, I've hit this with a hammer, here, scratched it with a key, here, gouged it with the corner of a knife as hard as I could, and wiped the entire thing with acetone thoroughly, and it's still holding up to all of that abuse. It's pretty good. I'm impressed. Okay, now I know I already did turmeric with beef fat in the shop, but you didn't actually see that it was turmeric, so for those non-believers, we're going to do it again with water on a white door. See how we do. I'm going to let it sit for a few minutes. There you go. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to try the one-handed clean off and we'll see how we did. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of yellow, but let's try a little bleach. I used our household bleach, oops, Lysol, and we know the Lysol doesn't damage it, and there's absolutely no stain remaining. So, turmeric, the nastiest of stains, still safely removed with bleach. So today we put our finish through the ringer. We tested the scratch, stain, impact, chemical, and water resistance. And honestly, even I was surprised by how well it held up. Now, there's one caveat I didn't actually catch while filming, but I noticed it after the fact and it made me realize something. I also want to be as honest and transparent as possible with these tests, so I'm going to explain it here. When I was testing the chemical resistance in our kitchen, I noticed after filming that the bleach had actually marred the surface of that recently sprayed white door. And it was also able to accept a turmeric stain, although it was eventually removable. However, the other sample that I'd made over a month ago was completely unaffected by both. And the reason for that is that while the coating on the door was as dry and hard as it would be very soon after spraying, the chemical cross-linking of the hardener in the top coat, which is what gives it that amazing chemical resistance, hadn't yet finished. That hardener is the second part that we add to the paint, which takes it from a 1K coating to a 2K coating. So while the coating is as hard as it will be before we install it in a client's home, that chemical cross-linking takes more time, which is about 2 to 3 weeks, just depending on things like heat and humidity in the home. So that's why our sample sprayed over a month ago wouldn't stain or be affected by the chemical cleaners, but the door sprayed just a few days ago was, albeit mildly. Now, in practice, this wouldn't be a concern, as you shouldn't be cleaning your cabinets with harsh chemical cleaners anyways, let alone on day one. And God forbid, one of our clients did actually mar the finish on a door, we can obviously easily respray it, but nevertheless, it was still really interesting to see that chemistry in action, and I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, any coating is still just paint. It's a fraction of a millimeter thick, and if that door underneath gets damaged, the paint is going to feel that too, like the example I gave of driving your car into a telephone pole. But here's what we're actually looking for. Does the coating stay intact when that happens? Does it hold on, conform, and keep protecting, or does it crack, flake, and fly off the surface? And aesthetically, does it get stained by common kitchen products? If it does get stained by something and you need to resort to a stronger cleaning agent like bleach, does the coating still survive intact? And as we saw, ours definitely stayed intact. And that matters more than you might think. Kitchens take more abuse than anywhere else in your home. And when a coating fails, whether it's chips or cracks or gets scraped off, that raw door underneath is now exposed. So every future hit, every splash of water, and every cleaning product accelerates the damage from that point outwards. If it's MDF, it starts swelling, and if it's wood, those surface fibers break down and the problem spreads. But when the coating holds, even with a dent or a gouge, the paint is still there. It's still sealed and still protecting everything around it. It's also minimally visible to the naked eye. Think of it like a roof. If a tree falls on your roof, but just puts a dent in your roof, and it stays intact, then no rain gets in and you're still protected. But if that same tree falls on your roof and instead punctures it or cracks the roof, then the rain pours in. And that is when the real damage starts. That's what a coating that stays intact actually means for you. Fast forward 10 years, and the difference is either a kitchen that's covered everywhere in chips with the original finish or primer showing through, raw edges, peeling paint, and swollen doors, or one that just has a few small dents that you'd really only notice up close. That's what a coating that stays intact actually means for you. So now you can see why we love these Waterborne 2K coatings. It doesn't have the noxious chemical off-gassing of solvent coatings like lacquer. It's totally safe to be sprayed in clients' homes, and it's incredibly durable. So there you go, a million technical questions, all hopefully answered in one video. If you actually made it this far, thanks for watching. And please reach out if you think we might be able to help breathe new life into your kitchen. Bye!